Ladies and gentlemen, we're already a little bit late in terms of the start, but all of our key speakers are here. But most importantly, you're here, and I very much look forward to an exciting event, which I hope is going to create an opportunity also for discussion with you in the room. I wanted to start off by saying how delighted I am personally that I was asked to facilitate this meeting, because many of you don't know me, I'm one of the dinosaurs of the process. I got into this at the time of the second assessment report of the IPCC in 1994, leading the Dutch delegation, and then did negotiations on behalf of the European Union. I was then Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, all the way up until that horrible Conference of Parties in Copenhagen. And then moved on to do other things. But this session really is an opportunity for me to be on the podium here with my family. All those different parts of the United Nations system, the regional economic and social commissions that are working so hard to deliver on the commitments that you created last year in Paris, and that we now have to deliver on. So, by way of introduction to this session, we live, as you know, in incredibly exciting times. Last year, 2015, was an absolutely phenomenal year, certainly from a UN perspective, in the sense that we had first in July, I think, of 2015, a conference on financing for development in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, which fundamentally changed the debate and the landscape on financing to not only focus on the role of development cooperation and development assistance, but to really talk about what needs to happen in terms of fiscal reforms and fiscal policies in countries, what is the role of the private sector, and what is the role of development cooperation, development assistance as a critical factor in the whole machine. So that was one important event. Then we had, well, that was in June, actually. I think in September, we had the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in New York, which has given us, first of all, an agenda that not only applies to developing countries. I think the MDGs were largely targeted at developing countries, but the Sustainable Development Goals really are for the international community as a whole, and a much more integrated agenda, as all of you are aware. And then, of course, at the end of last year, the Paris conference, which led to, for the first time, to a global commitment to take action on climate change towards keeping temperature increase below 2 degrees and maybe even to 1.5 degrees centigrade. But that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge, because although that promise was made in Paris, we know that at the moment, the commitments that countries have actually made are more likely to take us towards 2.5, 3, or even more degrees increase. So part of the challenge is, how do we close the gap? In an interview earlier this week, I said that Paris was the COP of promises, and that Marrakesh and beyond will be the COPs of keeping promises. So how do we do that? Critical to keeping those promises are the parts of the United Nations system, the regional economic and social commissions that are on the podium here. They are the ones that have the closest political relationship with the countries in the regions. They are the ones that are probably best positioned to drive the political agenda at the regional and at the sub-regional level. And they are the ones that have a very close insight in terms of what needs to happen to deliver on the Paris promises, and to ensure that the United Nations system, in an integrated way, stands at the side of countries, especially of developing countries, to meet the promises, to deliver on what was committed in Paris. So it's that little challenge, that tiny challenge of delivering on Paris, and what the role of all of these organizations can be in that context, that we will be discussing today. I think, and now I know, that the agenda is up there on the screen behind me. We have a very compact program, which is why I'm going to stop talking now and first give the floor to a number of representatives from the regional economic and social commissions to present their views on where we stand and on the agenda, and then follow the list of speakers from then on. And as you see from the agenda, there is at least the plan for an interaction with you. So that's the scenario today. Thank you again for being here. Being an obstreperous person, I want to start off by changing the order of speakers and asking Shamshad Akhtar, the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to speak first. Shamshad, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for being our moderator. And as you said, you've done it all, so we couldn't have asked for a better moderator who knows it all. So it's going to be challenging convincing him of anything. And thank you for being here. I know we are competing with the plenary, which is a hard one. On our side, I think the way United Nations ESCAP office is thinking of supporting the implementation part of it is to keep in mind the climate change and the sustainable development nexus. We all know that they are strongly interlinked and they have the potential to reinforce each other or conversely to impede each other's success. So we are actually not just looking at one element of it, but trying to see how we can reinforce the two agendas to get better results in terms of our dialogue with the authorities. Climate action, as we all know, is integral to the Sustainable Development Goals, both through action on dedicated climate focus Sustainable Development Goals, complemented by the covenants of sustainable energy for all, and the implementation of other socioeconomic and environment related SDGs. Rather than proceeding on two parallel tracks, the integrated framework of the 2030 Agenda actually offers us a very good opportunity to pursue the climate change challenge within the larger context of sustainable development. Significant co-benefits that climate change action will have for sustainable development need to be accompanied by effective management of the trade-offs. So let me take a few seconds to elaborate this point. On the mitigation side, co-benefits of climate action include things like reduced air pollution, greater productivity, reduced transport congestion, and greater energy security. These benefits can be quite substantial. For example, in China, air pollution has been linked to 1.23 million premature deaths in 2010 and damages of around 10 to 13% of GDP. Um, on the adaptation side, my second point, actions to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability have direct development outcomes, including the diversification of livelihoods, activities of vulnerable groups to reduce poverty, and their improved health and sanitation, all non-climate SDGs, but highly interrelated. Third, it's important to keep in mind that besides the growth trade-offs, the energy water food nexus poses challenges of how to balance the sectoral needs within the binding constraints of water. Pursuing a single track, low carbon energy agenda comprising hydropower can have negative ramifications on other important water uses, especially in agriculture and water supply use. So imagine we are a policymaker in a country. How do we operate with these complexities, but at the same time getting the analytics and the architecture right in our heads as policymakers is quite critical. And that's a service that the regional commissions provide, given that they are multi-sectoral bodies and an intergovernmental platform. In practice, the interface between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda is visible within the approach to the nationally determined contributions, which are the primary communication tools for countries' climate change ambitions. Asia and Pacific's NDCs show that the region's countries are increasingly mainstreaming the SDGs and climate strategies into their national development plans and sector strategies so that they are reinforcing this. It's happening at a slower pace, but it's increasingly being understood. In this context, formulating, of course, the long-term low emissions development strategies to better understand quantity and optimize development co-benefits will, of course, be very critical. These will also serve to achieve wide buy-in of national stakeholders to attract longer-term finance and to act as a bridge to ensure that the region is on track to achieve long-term decarbonization needed to achieve the globally agreed targets of the Paris Agreement. There are some strong examples of countries in our region, and I would be amiss if I did not highlight them, that are actually based on the notion that action to combat climate change can also help to deliver SDGs, the point I made earlier. So China and India are making huge strides to increase energy efficiency, thereby realizing significant energy savings and higher productivity in industry. The top 10,000 program in China and the PAT program in India set mandatory energy intensity targets and cover around 85% of China's industrial energy consumption and 40% of that in India respectively. Let me take another smaller economy example, Cambodia. It is the first Asian uh, least developed country to adopt a national green growth roadmap. And then we have Vietnam that has made impressive progress in defining its low carbon future through its green growth strategy and action plans. Let me turn to another landlocked economy, Bhutan. It has committed to permanent zero net emissions built on hydropower, forest protection, and ecotourism. There are many examples, but in interest of time, I thought I'll just confine to few cases which are very diverse, but do bring in some interesting contrast with a combination of strong commitments. So in conclusion, SCAP, with its broad convening power and its multi-sectoral expertise, has considerable potential, like other regional commissions that you will hear, to catalyze regional cooperation and offer integrated support to countries on climate change and SDGs. Many of SCAP's existing efforts in financing for development, regional follow-up and review of the 2030 agenda, enhancing statistical capabilities, and sustainable energy cooperation are already strengthening the SDG climate nexus and can be further reoriented to support member states. One of the two other important areas which are very critical to mention, which are really forte of regional commissions. One is the disaster risk reduction, and it's of course nexus with climate change. We have about half of the world's disasters in Asia Pacific region, and we are working collectively with the member states. And as you know, there is an SDG goal related to that, supported with the Sendai framework. Another is, of course, the whole area of the cross-border transaction, and there are a number of transboundary goals which lend themselves also to the nexus between sustainable, say, transport, sustainable energy, and so forth, but also ensuring that as you construct these corridors, that these are climate resilient. I'll stop here in interest of time, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Shamshad. I hope later in the discussion, you talked about the integrated support that SCAP can provide to countries in the region and to stimulate dialogue within the region. I hope we have a chance a little bit later to hear some more from you on how you see the requests, the need, the expressions of need for support from countries changing in the light of what has happened in Paris. So I hope we can get around to that later. But first, let me go back to the order of speakers and ask Christian Friesbach, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Europe, to speak to us. Christian.
Thank you very much, Yves Dupont, and you introduced yourself as a dinosaur, and I don't think anybody in this room see you as a dinosaur. You are one of our climate heroes and have always been so, and you were the hero also in Copenhagen, despite all the challenges. As a Dane, I agree with you, it was a disaster. But what came out of it? What came out of it was something extremely important, because it was in Copenhagen and with your leadership that we managed to turn the climate debate totally upside down. It became something that has to do with constraints and quotas and restrictions, and no countries wanted to join. But in Copenhagen, it was turned upside down. And your leadership and the leadership of the Secretary General in initiating the Sustainable Energy for All program was decisive, because sustainable energy for all is about access to energy. It's about investments in renewables. It's about houses that are more energy efficient, and therefore people save money living in them, and can use it for things they want for their families. And all that is aspirational. So it came from quotas and constraints to something that people wanted. They wanted the access and the renewables and the energy efficiency. And it suddenly became about investments and innovations all over the place. And it became about more jobs and good jobs and green jobs. And that is something that turned the entire climate debate upside down. And it was the pathway that brought us to Paris. And I think that's important to remember. We just had our Environment for Europe Ministerial in Batumi this summer, and their countries came from all over our region, 56 countries, US, Canada, to Russia and Tajikistan. They came and they signed up to an initiative we call Big E, the Batumi Initiative for the Green Economy. And countries come and say, yes, we want to have this. We want to have a green economy. And we want to have more jobs and green jobs and good jobs. And that is the way we can tackle also climate change, integrating it into everything we do and providing a pathway where citizens and companies and countries and communities, they want it because it gives them so many benefits apart from the climate action that we so desperately need. Shamshad mentioned air pollution. We host the Air Convention in UNECE also. It's a fantastic convention that for 30 years now have brought down air pollutants in the UNECE region by 40–70%, starting with sulfur, but ammonium and organic pollutants and heavy metals and all of it. There are significant co-benefits. Some studies show that it has raised the average lifespan in our region by 1 year. And if you take further actions, you can get another year. So that's a good message to give to citizens, just by tackling air pollution, cleaner air, better air, especially in our cities. And the good news is also that this air convention is now the first legally binding instrument to tackle also short-lived climate pollutants. The short-lived climate pollutants, the fine particles that penetrates your lungs and gives you cancer, the black carbon, the nitrogen oxides, the volatile organic materials. These are short-lived climate pollutants. Can we do something with short-lived climate pollutants? We can have a climate impact fast because they are by nature short-lived, so they get out of our atmosphere quickly, but we can also really create significant health benefits for our citizens, especially in our cities. So that's a really win-win-win situation. And there are, on top of that, substantive economic benefits, because air pollution damages the crops for farmers and the fish for fishermen, and of course there are health costs and damages to our buildings. So that's a good example of how we can integrate climate action and create co-benefits by tackling air pollution. We also have the Water Convention in UNECE. It's now a global convention, and the Water Convention also are providing a new framework for transboundary water management. We know climate change will hit us through water, too much or too little, and therefore tackling water in a transboundary manner is essential to tackle climate change. And again, there are significant co-benefits by doing it together. And under the Water Convention, they have now launched the first toolkits on water and adaptation to climate change. And the first transboundary adaptation strategies have been developed now. Transboundary, the Neman River, the Dniester River in Europe. And here, working with river basin organizations all over the world, there are so many co-benefits if we can tackle it. And so on the adaptation side, the same approach should be taken to focus on the many additional benefits we can get from tackling climate change. A few other examples of work that we hope can be relevant to the negotiations here and to climate action. We host the Aarhus Convention. Aarhus Convention is a very fine convention, and I don't say that only because Aarhus is also a town in Denmark, which it is. That's also why I can pronounce the Aarhus Convention. But the Aarhus Convention is a fine convention. It's on public participation, access to information, and access to legal redress, which if your rights, environmental rights, are not respected. And this is crucial to climate action. Get access to good information about greenhouse gas emissions. Get access to good information about environmental effects and damages and policies. Be able to influence the decision making in the country where you live. It's Article 6 in the UNFCCC Convention, the Climate Convention. It's Article 6. And it's crucial, again, to enable citizens to participate and be part of decision-making, which, again, can get us to better climate decisions. On the energy side, we are also in the regional commissions worked hard also together. We have a strong cooperation between all regional commissions on energy. One of the tools that one of the things we have focused on is the UN framework classification for fossil fuels and mineral resources. And this is, of course, a classification tool to enable you to invest properly in fossil fuels, which we want to avoid in the future. But without having a proper classification tool that can allow you, if you are to invest in fossil fuels, to do it in the fossil fuels where you have the highest efficiency and the lowest socio-economic costs and the best technical availability to save energy while doing it, we will also have additional emissions from fossil fuels than we want. We work on methane management in coal mines, another example. Huge co-benefits as well. Can you tackle methane in coal mines? You will save lives, because those are the accidents when the methane is in the coal mine and an accident happens. Hundreds of coal mines are still killed all over the world from this. So can you tackle benefits? You get cleaner coal, you get safer conditions for coal miners, and you can use the methane for fuel and thereby avoid additional emissions from other sources. Finally, let me mention transport. We deal with the transport conventions and all your vehicle standards. If you look at the vehicle here, there are E numbers all over the vehicles, and they are negotiated in something called the World Forum for Vehicle Regulations. And there we tackle also the energy efficiency standards in vehicles. Of course, not all companies have adhered to these standards. You know, the Volkswagen case, of course, cheating on our test. But there's a new test available. It's a better test and it's more difficult to cheat on. And moreover, we need to move beyond this. We need better energy efficiency in the transport sector. It's essential to tackle all the different issues we have with air pollution in cities and congestion and all of it, but also for climate action. And there I really hope that many of you from where you are will join us and push the entire industry to move faster on the vehicle regulations for energy efficiency. We need it, and we need it fast, because if you look at the numbers going ahead, the transport sector is going to be one of the largest emitters, and it's going to be one of the most difficult areas to tackle. And the cars are bought every day now, and we need them to become more energy efficient, and we can do it if we do it together. So these are some of the examples that we host and that we work on together. And again, we have to create the co-benefits, turn it upside down. A good economy, a green economy, a clean economy should also be a climate neutral economy. And this is what we should tell all our citizens and our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please go ahead and clap if you want to. I thought he deserves it. Christian, I think you're absolutely right that everybody wants the green economy. But what you're also saying implicitly, I think, is that not everybody understands how they can get to the green economy, and that an important piece of argumentation in that context is to point to those win-win-wins that you were talking about. So I also hope we can hear later from you in the conversation what sort of how the requests in the region are changing vis-a-vis the Economic Commission for Europe, requests from countries to help them understand how they can make that journey and make that transition. Okay, I would now like to hand over to Mr. Abdallah Hamdok, the Executive Secretary ad interim of the Economic Commission for Africa. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much, moderator. And let me start with an apology for coming late here. You know, in this type of big meetings, you are scheduled to speak in so many of them, and they are bound to get off track and all that. So I'm really sorry about this, to have come here, because I just finished speaking another event on greening Africa industrialization. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to join you in this very important event on advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through climate action using integrated solutions for regional implementation. In the Economic Commission for Africa, we take the structural transformation has to be underpinned by industrialization, and through which to achieve Africa's development ambition as framed in the Global Development Framework of 2030, but also anchored on Africa's own development framework, which is exemplified in Agenda 2063. You would agree with me, structural transformation requires increasing the productivity of the economy in all its sectors, essentially addressing the drivers of transformation. You know them. I think greening industrialization offers tremendous opportunities, whether it is addressing green infrastructure or green urbanization. Africa is the fastest urbanized continent in the world. That comes with challenges, but also comes with opportunities, which would allow us to leapfrog this process and maybe straight go into embracing green technology and energy and all that. We are very rich in natural renewable resources, whether it is solar, wind, or hydro and all that. Also, industrialization has to be linked, policy has to be linked to the other sectors of the economy. It has to talk to trade, agriculture, and all that. And in this respect, the development objective, which for us to attain this green development as exemplified in Paris Agreement, calls for a resolution of very complex challenges and development of new policies for transport, energy, health, agriculture, water, infrastructure, forestry, and all that. Paris Agreement represents an appropriate framework for addressing these issues. But for this to happen, parties to the agreement must fulfill their obligations. And I think as this COP22 is duped as the implementation COP, Paris Agreement did not dwell into the implementation modalities. And in Africa, we are particularly concerned about the mechanisms that are in place. I would like here to maybe flag three of them. First, the issue of finance. Without adequate finance, whatever blueprints we agree on, it means nothing. So we would like the world to come to this issue. Second, technology transfer. There are hard and fast choices here. It is not straightforward. It is not easy. It costs money and all that. But also, it is venturing into a by and large untested waters. So how can we address these trade-offs? Key to this is the issue of capacity gaps and skills and all that. We need to address it together with our partners if this is to move us forward. Allow me in the remaining time, I would like to share with you maybe two instruments at the regional level we are putting forward to address the issue of implementation, SDGs, and climate change and all that. And here I'm talking about the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development and the Climate Information for Development in Africa. Both initiatives, the Regional Forum, of course, this is part of the global governance architecture, which at the regional level provide for linking national level implementation to regional and the globe. And it provides the opportunity for sharing of information, sharing of experiences, lesson learned, and all that. And in our region, the first one was held in Addis in 2015, but the last forum was held in Cairo this year in May, under the theme of ensuring inclusive and integrated implementation and follow-up of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063. In Africa, we have a compounded challenge of, if the world is moving or transitioning from MDGs to SDGs, we have a double transition, moving from MDGs to SDGs, but also we have our own development framework, which is 50 years. It is up to 2063, which also provided another layer of complexity and another layer of need for harmonization and all that. So it is an important issue to bear in mind moving forward. The second initiative or instrument I would like to share with you, Chair, and I will stop there, is the Climate Information for Development in Africa. This is an initiative that we are housing at the ECA, but it is an initiative of the three Pan-African institutions, the African Development Bank and the African Union Commission, working hand in hand together to address issues of harmonizing, but also working on climate information for economic development and growth. Let me share with you, maybe briefly, the focus of this second initiative. It is intended to scaling up investment and creating the enabling environment for widely available climate information and services. Second, it provides for the analytical framework for climate-informed development planning. It is intended to support climate governance, policy, advocacy, and implementation frameworks. It calls for the provision of an integrated open access climate resource platforms and information services and choices. It also calls for the development of approaches and strategies that ensure communication, outreach, and advocacy for climate information services to various stakeholders and development partners. To conclude, Chair, we in Africa are ready to build on our collaborative actions to develop integrated solutions to accelerate our development agenda defined by 2063 and 2030. But we also would like to share our own experience and also look at learning and sharing experiences from other regions of the world. And I think the platform of the regional economic commissions is an appropriate platform for cross-fertilization of ideas and sharing and learning experiences from across the globe. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That was very useful. It might sound perfectly normal and natural to all of you in the room that the Economic Commission for Africa, the African Development Bank, the African Union Commission are entering into this green urbanization challenge together. But I think it is quite unique that three institutions like that are really formulating the agenda together. And I'd be very interested to hear from you later in the conversation, once again, how that integrated approach is making it easier or more effective for you to work with countries at the national level. So thank you very much for that. I would now like to hand over to the lady on my right, Rula Majdalani. Am I saying it reasonably right? Okay, good. Thank you. She's the Director of Sustainable Development for the Economic and Social Commission for West Asia. So I'm very interested to hear your views on this issue. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and I do apologize on behalf of Dr. Rima Khalaf, the Executive Secretary of ESQA, who was retained at the... there she is. Maybe she would want to come and deliver her statement. There she is. Would you...
No, go on.
Then I'll go on. So I'll read her statement. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Arab governments are strongly committed to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and they do realize the need to ensure its coherence with the 2030 Agenda and the other major global processes. Arab countries are experiencing firsthand the repercussions of climate change on their development and human security. They have seen how climate change and weather-related disasters are increasing water scarcity, affecting food security, damaging coastal zones, impacting infrastructure, and affecting the health, land, and livelihoods of vulnerable groups. They are determined to combat it and have started integrating adaptation and mitigation measures into their development agendas. Despite such a commitment, the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda will be affected by three main factors: regional instability, the implementation of global commitments, and national capacity to deliver on climate action. The Arab region has become one of the most turbulent and conflict-ridden in the world. In the past 5 years, over 40% of the Arab countries have witnessed one form or another of armed conflict. In addition to death and destruction, these conflicts have unleashed the largest wave of forced displacement since the Second World War. More than half of the world's refugees today come from our region. Development indicators in conflict countries have regressed to their levels of 40 years ago. In such countries, climate action will not feature high in strategies as priorities are rearranged to address imminent threats to people's lives. Our region also suffers from the destructive effects of the longest occupation in post-colonial times, the Israeli occupation of Palestine. The Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda will be difficult to achieve when Palestinians have little control over their natural resources, or their lives for that matter, and where they continue to be subjected to Israeli violence, blockades, aerial bombardments, and destruction of homes, property, agricultural lands, and water installations. The second challenge relates to the implementation of global commitments. As you may know, 19 out of the 22 Arab countries have submitted their NDCs, which focus largely on adaptation measures related to water, agriculture, and health, but also include a suite of mitigation initiatives. These commitments are premised on what has been clear since Durban. An ambitious climate change agenda cannot be achieved unless there is appropriate technology transfer, targeted capacity building, and sufficient financing accessible to developing countries. If these global commitments do not come through, then implementation in the region and beyond will be put at risk. Finally, our countries, like many others, will face technical difficulties in the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. Key challenges include lack of data, inadequate technical tools, insufficient financial resources, and weak institutional capabilities. ESQA has recently conducted a preliminary assessment of data availability during the 17 SDGs. Findings reveal major data gaps in 12 goals, such as those related to poverty, inequality, innovation, and infrastructure, and significant problems related to data disaggregation. Hence, a major focus of our program is to build the capacity of national statistical offices to help them collect new statistics and improve the quality of the data produced. ESCWA is also supporting its member states in aligning and integrating the 2030 agenda into their national development plans, fiscal frameworks, and sector strategies. We are also working with them to ensure coherence in planning, monitoring, and reporting on the climate-related SDGs. At the regional level, we have supported the production of common Arab strategies on water, sustainable energy, food security, climate change, and disaster risk reduction. Given the scarcity of water across the region, ESCWA's monitoring of water indicators actually precedes the SDGs. Based on a mandate from the Arab states to regionalize the water-related MDG target, we launched in 2010 the MDG, what we call the MDG Plus initiative. It yielded a set of region-specific indicators, the establishment of an intergovernmental reporting mechanism, and the formation of national monitoring teams that issue annual reports on water accessibility, affordability, and quality. ESCWA is supporting countries and regional processes through its conceptual framework based on the Nexus approach that analyzes interlinkages between different sectors and development goals. Our work on the water, energy, and food security nexus is the most relevant to climate action. This is supporting integrated planning, policy making, and institutional coordination. This approach combines quantitative and qualitative assessment to identify trade-offs and win-win interventions. Distinguished colleagues, to assist our member states implement an integrated 2030 agenda, ESCWA is pursuing a comprehensive and mutually reinforcing package of normative, technical, and capacity building initiatives. Through our knowledge products and technical assistance, we aim to help our countries deliver on their commitments to the INDCs and, more importantly, to their own people. But we know that many factors remain beyond their sphere of influence. Not much can be achieved if foreign occupations are not brought to an end, and if conflicts are not speedily resolved in a just and equitable manner. And not much can be achieved if the most powerful and the most polluting renegade on commitments they made to save the planet and humanity, and for that matter, from impeding disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Many interesting things you said, including this notion of regionalizing the MDGs on water. After what Mr. Hamdok said about an integrated approach at a regional level of institutions. So interesting to see how following on the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement, you're from different perspectives working on regionalization of approaches. So thank you very much for that. I would now like to hand over to Mr. José Luis Samaniego, Director of Sustainable and Human Settlements Division of the Economic and Social Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you very much, Ivo. Pleasure to be here sharing this panel, and thank you for you being here with us this afternoon. A couple of words about Latin America that contrast with other regions. Latin America is a region of peace and highly urbanized. It's been successful in pulling out of poverty an important number of people, which are now a vulnerable middle class that is demanding new public services. So there's an appeal, as was said before, in repackaging the nexus between the climate change agenda, the 2030 agenda, under this green economy concept, which in Latin America we're promoting as a big green push, which underlines the need of coordinating investment, public policies, fiscal expenditures into a coherent impulse towards a structural change, towards lower environmental footprint activities, more inclusive, and that serve as an economic motor. We are facing a risk, though, which is a flight of these emerging middle classes from the public services, which is a big threat on the process, for example, of urbanization, on fiscal solidarity of these emerging middle classes. If they are not receiving the quality of public services they deserve, they move from, let's say, public transport to private transport, public health to private health, public education to private education. So there, the sequence in which these needs are tended to becomes very important. We may liberate resources for education, but then the new space for consumption may aggravate the urban problems in cities. So, for example, public transportation is one of those key elements that brings together the climate change agenda with a 2030 agenda, because it's a new motor, it's inclusive, and it's lower in its environmental footprint. We see progress in the region, but it's a differentiated progress. We are seeing countries which are introducing the 2030 agenda into the national and sectorial planning. But we would like to see the same pace of progress in the way institutions and planning is responding to the Paris Agreement. And that is a little bit behind, and we are worried. We think that we should be seeing now how countries allocate the climate burdens of mitigation and adaptation across the sectors and the regions. 2018, when the Paris Agreement calls for the first revision, is right around the corner, and we are barely having the time left, seeing the budget carbon left to our countries to respond rapidly to that need. Responding to what Ivo asks us, are we receiving new demands from the countries? Yes, we are receiving them, and in some cases we are creating new demands. Let me give you an example of this creation of new demand. ECLAC is now the official repository of the planning, of the plans, of the development plans and the sectorial plans for the whole of Latin America. So that allows us to compare how important are the environmental targets, the climate change targets, the water targets, the public transportation targets, the links with local governments across the region. And we see huge disparities, and in many cases, worrisome low priority levels for key issues within the 2030 agenda and the climate change agenda. We have, as many other regional commissions have, a very clear demand on improving the set of indicators that allows the region to compare itself. Once we have the indicators, we will try to create the demand for peer reviewing among the countries that synergizes with both the climate change agenda and the 2030 agenda. We're getting demands from our countries to do peer reviewing on best practices on climate change. For example, lowering the discount rate for public investment. We're getting new demands on analyzing how the financial sector can internalize climate risk. We're getting new demands on how to deal with green fiscal policy. We're creating new demands by putting on the table modeling instruments for countries to be able to assess what public policies would do to growth, to employment, and to emissions, to greenhouse gas emissions. And we're also following on the Aarhus example, a Latin American treaty to regulate access to information, public participation in environmental decisions, and public access, and access to justice, to environmental justice, which we think is a counterpart of good public policy. So if we have that initiative from the side of governments and we have the public participation mechanisms of Principle 10, then we have instruments that can synergize for better public policies. I think I would leave it at that. There's an interaction between new demands and new instruments that we can push on the table, and especially allow for countries to compare themselves at a regional level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You said that Latin America is a region of peace. Latin America is also happy in the sense that there is only one least developed country in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is Haiti. But nonetheless, the countries in the region are very different. And if we have the chance later on, it'd be interesting to hear a bit more from you of how perhaps some of the weaker brethren economically are responding to this challenge. But as a whole, so far, we're on a roll in the sense that Shamshad was telling us about how she is in a position for the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific to respond across institutions and create institutional integration. Then we heard Christian Frisbach for the Economic Commission for Europe, pointing to win-wins across issues, so not across institutions, but across issues. And then we heard from the Economic Commission for Africa how a bank, a regional commission, and the commission for what's the exact name, the African Union Commission, are working together across institutions to give a harmonized message. And now from Latin America and the Caribbean, peer review of best practices across countries in the region learning from each other. So some very interesting messages so far on regional cooperation. Now, as the saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining. And the cloud is that the two gentlemen who were supposed to speak next, David Nabarro, the Special Representative for the 2030 Agenda, and my old friend Daniele Violetti, the Chief of Staff for the UNFCCC, are both not here. That's the cloud. But the silver lining is that we now get more time for question and answer from the floor for you to engage in this discussion. So I would now like to open this up to you in the room to state an opinion, ask a question. Two conditions. One, please say who you are or who you represent if you want to. And secondly, if it's a question, please say who the question is directed to. And mainly a final requirement, please make it brief and not a long speech so others can intervene as well. So is there anyone that would like to say something or to ask a question of somebody on the panel? Yes, sir, in the nice checkered shirt.
Thank you very much. Is this on?
Yeah, but speak close to it, please.
Sure. My name's Neil Dawson from the University of East Anglia in the UK. Under the Sustainable Development Goals rhetoric, we need to do differently and to reach the poorest of the poor, to leave no one behind. So a simple question for all the panelists was, how do we instill that thinking into these regional programs through concrete strategies to reach the poorest?
Okay, I'm not sure that rhetoric is the nicest word to use in this context, but the point is very valid. How do you get that across to communities and engage them? So a question to all of the panel. Anyone that would like to take it first? I'll ask three panelists. Yes, please. You're brave and ready to go.
To start with, maybe I'd like to say that the SDGs did and something really different from other processes or previous processes is that it didn't really come as a top-down. I think with the SDGs or with the 2030 agenda, it has perceived the widest ever consultation with member countries, with actors, with civil society, with experts, and across the different institutional, with all concerned really with sustainable development to make it holistic. I think that it has come also, it reflects in many ways the concerns from the region. Now, of course, at a level of abstraction, you really need, you tend to forget the regional specificity. And this is where the regional dimension here, as we are presenting it, makes a lot of sense. It reflects, and this is where in the work that we are doing, for example, as ESCWA, we have grounded the SDGs into a lot of the work that is the challenges that are emanating from the region. And this is why we're saying there is no a development without peace, without justice, without putting an end to conflict and to occupation. And this is, in many ways, it reflects the challenges of the region. We have looked at even if the SDGs look at, you have goal 6, goal 7, and goal 2 that look at food, water, and energy separately. From our perspective, we've looked at them in a nexus setting where that integrated approach makes a lot of sense. And we have worked with the different communities at a thematic level, as you were saying, at an issue level, but also at an institutional level to work with the ministries of water, energy, and even the utilities. So in many ways, you really need to dig down. We are not starting from scratch. We do have things already success stories and also lessons to learn from that we are building the SDGs or the implementation of the SDGs.
I think building on this, Christian, could I ask you to come in on this as well? Because there may be people to who climate change is not a terribly appealing agenda. I can't imagine why. But those people would be very convinced by issues around air quality and early deaths that you were referring to. So to what extent do you see that integration across issues as an opportunity to explain the agenda more clearly and engage people more directly at a local level?
I think that's exactly it. And the SDGs provide us a good framework for doing so, because that is really a cross-sectoral integrated agenda. And in many ways, the regional commissions are sustainable development organizations because we are really cross-sectoral. We have transport and energy, and some have agriculture and inequality and forest. So we have so many issues embodied into the work of the regional commission. So in many ways, we are well suited to try to do it. Not to say that it's easy, but we should be able to do it. But our member states are also understanding this agenda. In Europe, we host, well, an issue like the Air Convention is a good example. That is really cross-sectoral because that is dealing with transport and it's dealing with agriculture, it's dealing with health, and it's dealing with air quality, and thereby it's creating climate action, as I tried to describe it before. But there are also a number of processes in Europe that started by our member states that have tried to do it. We have an environment and health process at a ministerial level trying to bring together environment, health communities. One good result of their actions have been a protocol on water and sanitation that we do together with the World Health Organization. We just had the meeting of the parties yesterday in Geneva. And that is, again, a cross-sectoral issue where you see severe health benefits. There are still thousands of people, even in Europe, that do not have access to clean water or proper sanitation, and it kills children, and it creates waterborne diseases still in the UNECE region. So that's a good example of how you can tackle cross-border. We have something called the PEP, which is the Transport, Health, Environment, Pan-European Process, the PEP in short, for good reasons. But that is bringing together the transport communities, the health communities, and the environmental communities. And they have launched a number of new initiatives on walking and cycling. And José Luis, he talked about public transport. They are also really promoting the public transport solutions because that combines all these agendas: transport, health, and environment. I'm pushing for them to negotiate a bicycle convention. I'm from Denmark, right? So I grew up on a bike, and I would really like to leave UNECE with a bicycle convention because I think there's so good opportunities to create better and stronger conditions for cycling in so many cities and communities all over the world. And that's a cross-sectoral approach to tackling an issue and with clear climate benefits as well. And finally, I'll just also mention we heard the review processes from Latin America. We host also the environment performance reviews. It's a very unique instrument developed by our member states and hosted. We do it for our member states, and OECD is doing it for the OECD member states, and we do it for the rest of our countries. And the environmental performance reviews are turning cross-sectoral now. They are in the spirit of the SDGs becoming cross-sectoral, cross-issue environmental performance reviews. So they go in and they are peer review mechanisms. They are demanded by countries. There's a lot of ownership from countries. They want them. So it's not, like a kind of a whip and a stick. This is really a lot of country ownership. And these environmental performance reviews, they tackle then air pollution and transport and agriculture and biodiversity and health issues at the same time, a country-driven agenda, and give recommendations, and countries implement approximately 80% of all recommendations after the EPR has been done, which is quite a good success rate, I would say, in terms of implementation. And it has boosted environmental policy in countries like Georgia and Belarus and all over our region. And that we can use a cross-sectoral approach to it. And we bring in all UN agencies in doing so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shamshad?
Yes, I think in addition to what has already been said, I thought it's important to mention that SDG framework itself has inherently, conceptually by design, an emphasis on leaving no one behind. So I think the demand that comes from the country to the regional commissions is to help mainstream a sustainable development agenda within the development plans through economic modeling, to promote more inclusive growth policies and inclusive development policies. So the huge demand that we get from countries is, tell us, how do we work through this? So a lot of work in different commissions is really to support the economic modeling, but mainstreaming inclusiveness in the process of development planning and fiscal policies. Another area where increasingly demand is coming on our side is the equitable distribution issue. So equity is very important, and one is, of course, the work on inequalities, which is directly linked to leaving no one behind, since there has been so much of widening of the Gini coefficient has been rising in Asia region a lot, that there is a lot of analytical work that is being demanded, but also to looking at what are the progressive policies that can be adopted to support reversal of these inequalities. And couple of examples on that front for which work is being asked. One is, how do you design a tax system that will promote equity? In most of the countries now, the taxation systems are more regressive. The second is, how do you design spending programs that could uplift those that you want to leave no one behind? And a big demand that's coming is really, how do you design social security systems? And of course, we have undertaken a thematic piece of work on that, but also there is a lot of exchange within the region. So cross-fertilization of experience to promote balanced economic growth, because we have countries that have done it better and we have countries that haven't. And finally, the last point, as Ivo was mentioning, different commissions have different types of geographies and country complexion. Our commission, which is 60 membership plus, almost over half of them are countries with special needs. So leaving no one behind has also another meaning for us, that we have to focus more on working and supporting the countries with special needs, which are about 33. They are landlocked, least developed countries, and the SIDS, the small islands, 14. And we have huge demand for capacity building and designing of inclusive policies and helping them with national sustainable strategies development.
Thank you. Mr. Hamdok?
Thank you very much. I think the change from MDGs to SDGs is not a semantic issue. It is very real. For us, when you look back in 2000, when the MDGs were approved or adopted, or very little by way of consultation, it was just pushed into our throats. And probably the cynical would say, during that period, it was a compromise that meant to save the summit and all that. For SDGs, and particularly in our region in Africa, we went into a very serious consultation process that produced what we call the Common African Position on post-2015 development agenda. And this has really meant addressing most of the deficiencies of the MDGs. Looking at, let me just flag some of them. Issues of quality. MDGs by and large focused on quantity. Here we are looking at quality of education, quality of health service, environment, and all that. Second, the initial conditions. It matters. If you want to have poverty, when you are starting from 10% incidence of poverty, as opposed to 80%, initial conditions matters, and it requires much more effort, policy, and all that. Third, the beauty of the SDGs, it allows, because of the flexibility of the framework, assessment at various levels, global, regional, at national, and even subnational level. And in that sense, we have in Africa a regional publication on the MDGs annually, and that experience is handy, we can use into this. But also the SDGs has the means of implementation. I would like to believe the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and many others, these are means that would help us track what we are going to implement within these SDGs. And then finally, I think like Latin America and Europe, in Africa, we have the African peer review mechanism, which I would like to believe it's a unique instrument, not only like Europe, where the issue of the peer review it's between peers, but on technical issues, transport, maybe environment, and that sort of thing. But the African peer review mechanism is venturing into tracking assessment on very difficult and challenging issues like governance and all that. So I'll stop
Okay.
here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I know. I saw him come in. Don't worry. I want to take one more question from the floor. I asked the people asking questions to be brief. I didn't ask the panelists to be brief in their answers. So I'm now asking the panelists to be brief in their answers. That wasn't pointed at you. It's at everyone. At everyone. But the lady in front here, I think you wanted to raise a question, right? Didn't you? Yes? Yes? You didn't? Okay. Somebody else. Yes, please. The lady behind you.
Hi, Erica Erica Lennon with the Center for International Environmental Law. My question is, or first I want to say that we appreciate the work that's happening in both Latin America and related to Principle 10 and public participation, and in Europe as well. We think it's great. And so my question is whether the other regional commissions have similar plans or are going to enhance public participation and put forward more related to public participation in Principle 10.
Okay, I think getting all of the other regional commissions to respond on that point, we don't have time for now. Grab them afterwards, I would suggest. Is there anyone else? I'm really apologize, but is there anyone else with a quick question? Yes, lady in the back over there.
It's Mrs. Jalila Sbehi from Morocco, elected member in the University Council of University Hassan II, Casablanca here in Morocco, and a member in an association that deals with family and women. My comment is the following. It seems that around in this COP22, there is an absence of debates concerning education and local cultures, because it seems that without dealing with education, without introducing this in education of kids, of teenagers, this cannot succeed just with university students. It should be introduced in education. And local cultures have to change a little bit, especially if we compare the cultures of the West with the cultures of the East. There is a big difference between the two. And there I introduced this interest in psychology. Please try to consider the psychological impact of this, especially on third world countries, because it's not easy to imagine ourselves in this context. Okay, we need to prepare people psychologically. There are many people who are against this or rejecting even the objectives of such debates. So I'd rather recommend that we deal a little bit with education and that we give consideration to local cultures, because in fact, we in the third world, we are really in a dilemma of whether we have to follow up the previous speed of development of the first world, of which we have been dreaming, getting industrialized and developing nuclear power, or just regressing to the past and going back to traditional, conventional ways of dealing with things. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It wasn't really a question, it was a statement, but still, José Luis Samaniego, do you want to say something about education, local culture? Is that getting enough attention in the context of the 2030 agenda, to your sense, in your region?
Unfortunately, no. As I was saying, this flight from public education to private education is weakening the contents of public education, actually. So you find that in islands of education, in good private schools, in good universities, and places which are at the frontier and fully funded. So in the end, you may have elites which are very well educated, but not necessarily the mass. So that's one of the issues, the grave issues of allowing for public services to decay.
Okay, thank you very much. I talked earlier about every cloud having a silver lining. One of the silver linings has come back to us after all. David Nabarro has joined us. He is the UN Special Advisor on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So we'd be very happy to hear from you a few words on where things stand. So please, sir, over to you, perhaps from the rostrum.
Which is better. Thank you so much, everybody. The reason why I'm late is I had to be at the formal opening of the, not just COP22, but CMA1. And I was really pleased to be there because it gave me a chance to feel some of the political signals that are around this meeting. And I thought I'd start just for a few moments with that, giving you my sense of the political signals. Then I wanted to just spend a moment on the evolution of the intellectual piece, really building on the discussions that Christian particularly took part in during the Chief Executives Board of the United Nations last week. And then I wanted to spend a few moments talking about the popular movement now that is bringing together climate and development and doing what is going to be the theme of this short set of remarks, doing something that is now unstoppable, unstoppable. And I want to keep saying that word as often as I can. The political signals. There are more heads of state and government here than was anticipated. Probably about 30 or 40% more. I don't know the exact number. We spent an awful lot of time greeting them at the far end this morning. Why have they come in? And why are there so many here, particularly from Africa, from the Caribbean, and from the Pacific? Answer, because they want to make it clear that they are leading the nation that is necessary. They're not hanging back. And secondly, they are reminding us that on the Paris Agreement, there are 193 signatories. That's an enormous number. There's only about 4 countries missing, or 4 states parties missing. And the Paris Agreement's gone into force much quicker than anybody realized. And so we are having CMA1, the first meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. Hugely important political signals. And that means that, as the Secretary General of the UN just said, what seemed impossible less than 10 years ago is now unstoppable. The corner has been turned. Now the intellectual challenge. In fact, what is now happening is that the climate agenda and the sustainable development agenda are just coming together, and automatically they're joining up. It's not comfortable because there are different actors behind each. But it means that all development has to be low carbon. It's not just all development, all activities have to be low carbon, and that resilience has to be built into everything. Obviously, the kind of resilience depends on the risks, but as these risks are increasing in so many different places, it's really important to plan for resilience. And that's the intellectual challenge. It means that all of us working in sustainable development actually need to retool, rethink, re-engineer. And it's this terribly important term of decarbonizing development or delinking carbon release from development and making everything sustainable. And now the third part, the popular movements. We were just discussing with Patricia Espinosa and a number of other leaders this morning. Look inside the United States. What percentage of the population is committed on the need for action, on climate, on sustainable development? Well, it's certainly more than 50%. And it depends on what polls you look at. Now, if you go to people under 25, it's 80 or 90%. Similarly, if you go throughout Europe, if you go into Africa, go into Asia, the younger the population, within reason, obviously, the higher the proportion who want to see global political and practical action, ambitious action related to climate, because it's a ticking time bomb. And that means that we have to recognize we've got a plan for the future in the SDGs, and that's what we've got to work on. The regional commissions are one of the most powerful elements within the UN structure. They're powerfully led, they're powerfully implemented, they connect, and they're close to and joined in a kind of umbilical cord to the countries within their regions. They are able to tune in to the emotions and the feelings of regions' people. We see it very strongly in all the regions represented here. And I commend them to you, and I'm delighted, although being late, that I had the opportunity to be here for this extremely important moment. Because actually, as well as having the political signals, the intellectual challenge, and the emotional energy of the popular movement, we've actually got an awful lot of work to do. And that work involves the hard graft of thinking through what decarbonized and resilient development really means in so many different countries. Just a final word about Morocco. This country is showing real leadership. We see it everywhere. And it's a real delight for me to be back here in Morocco, the second COP in Morocco recently, and to just feel the leadership of Moroccan people showing not only to themselves, but also to others in this region what can be done. Thank you very much indeed, Yuval.
Well, thank you very much for some very encouraging remarks about political and popular commitment and positivism, and the ability of the institutions on this panel to respond to that. So thank you for that. Things are very tightly planned in the UNFCCC, I know, so we're going to be kicked out of here in 4 minutes. But I want to use those 4 minutes to give each of the panelists 30 seconds to make a closing remark, maybe on that changing national demand for support. So I'll start with Christian and then go down the panel from there.
Thank you, but thank you, Uwe, for good moderation, and thank you all for participating. To 2 questions, I'll just say education for sustainable development. There is a pan-European program on education for sustainable development. I fully agree. We need to get it into our schools, to our kids. They are the ones that will mobilize, as we just heard David Nabarro saying. Also, it's the young people. That's where it comes from. We all know how our kids come home from school and forces us to distribute our garbage in different pots and change our light bulbs. That's where it comes from, you know. So education for sustainable development, tremendously important. There's a lot of experience in Europe. We are happy to share the programs and the principles. And on the public participation, change comes from below. And that is important. The Aarhus Convention is a global convention. All countries in the world are welcome to join. I think it's great that they do a version in Latin America, but public participation, building those instruments for access to information, to justice, and to be able to participate, I think are crucial. So just to do 2 questions, but thank you for a great dialogue, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Shamshad?
Yes, I think there was a question about the environmental EPRs and all that. I wanted to mention that all regional commissions and all the regions have their own specialization and special features. So in that context, yes, we do conduct a lot of original work, and while we may not be the standard setter globally, but Asia has its own standard setting in different dimensions. my last point is that I think sustainable development, like any other development, requires ownership. Very strong ownership, country ownership and political leadership. I am actually very encouraged in Asia Pacific across the board, whether it is sustainable development or climate change, that ownership is building up.
Thank you. Rula?
Thank you. I'd like to make three very brief remarks. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Navarro for the confidence he has shown in the regional commissions and what they can deliver. And indeed, the closeness to the region really brings us a strong impetus to deliver and keep up to the trust of the region. And this is what we're doing with getting them ready for delivering on the SDGs, but also on the COP process. The second point is that we're not starting from scratch. I have given the example, and I would be happy to talk more outside. On the nexus in the water, energy, food security, but then to show that we have indeed good examples that we can build on to work across sectors, but also across institutions. And the last point I'd like to make is that we have, again, the regional specificity is what should lead the process. And in our region, the issue of we cannot really have development, we cannot deliver without peace and security and justice for the people of the region.
Thank you. Abdallah?
Thank you very much. Just quickly, 2 points. I would like to comment on your observation, moderator, on the regional frameworks between the three institutions, ADB, AUC, and African Development Bank. I think this relationship is organized through what we call Joint Secretariat Support Office. It is well structured, but also it has been underpinned with a clear division of labor. The African Development Bank is a premier financier institution looking at finance. At ECA, we're looking at policy issues, norm settings, and analytical work. And the African Union Commission is the political arm of the continent that set the vision for the continent and all that. Second point I would like, and also this relationship is filtered down to the sub-regional level at SADC, ECOWAS, and all that. The last point I want to comment on is the issue of education. I think we are winning the numbers. There is definitely a huge achievement in terms of enrollment and all that, but we are facing challenges of quality of education. We have, our universities are producing huge number of young educated people, but they are not linked to, the economy is not responding to that. So this fantastic growth has been jobless growth, which is another challenge. I think environment provide an ample opportunity in looking at green growth that will provide jobs and all that. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jose Luis?
Thank you, Ivo. Two things. I think the combination of agendas of the Paris Agreement, SDGs, MDGs, everything is finally moving all the pieces, hopefully in the right direction, hopefully at the same speed, not necessarily, but that's the vision. And I mean public finance, public policy, indicators, financial institutions, and the rest, planning. And that's very positive. And the second thing is that, as we have seen with with many recent political events, the less losers we have in our societies, the less endangered people, I think we are enhancing the chances of moving on to sustainable development.
Thank you. Fantastic point. Our time is up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here in this very excited panel with my former family members. Please give the panel a warm round of applause. Thank you.
I think I made the right decision to get you there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a great hello.
Thank you. It's interesting.
She is somewhere around. She has to run.
Exactly.
I'm Rula Masdari. I'll give you my card.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Question. We'll see you in a while.
Thank you. something?
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm so glad I met you.
I'm so glad you were here.
I managed, but I was not really prepared for this.
You did a great job. And you felt much freer once you had done the presentation
Yeah.
and you could talk.
يلا.
So I'm from Taiwan. May I have a picture with you?
Sure.